Hey everyone, welcome back. It's Lisa. I'm here to show you some tips and tricks hopefully you find very useful if you are beginning your journey into watercolor. What a great time you're going to have. Okay, so this week we'll be going back into the Mediterranean world for our little demo, and you'll see that this with the other previous tutorials that I've done can all build up into helping you create your first scene. Okay, let's get into it. Now I'm going to start by drawing up just a simple wall, but I'm going to put it at a bit of an angle to the ground. And just for this one today, we're going to have the base of an entry of a doorway, and I'm actually going to start drawing up some stonework. I don't want it to be too even. It's not like modern day brickwork. This is going to be a feature around the door, and then back in here we'll have an actual door. Now I'm using 1-point perspective, which means all of the lines on the wall are actually going to be going back as if they would meet at a point off the page. You can even put a pin off the page and have a piece of string tied to it and pull the string, or have a ruler on the edge and your pin is stuck in another piece of paper, and you can literally do this to find your grout lines. Now, being that this is a watercolor and that it is representational of a very old building, it doesn't have to be perfect. The same technique is going to continue on the ground, so you would keep the same point further off the page, and this is going to be even less important that it's straight, because this is going to be random sandstone sort of ground. So we'll get going on this. I'm not focused too much on colour today because I'm really wanting you to understand how to paint the shapes. But in saying that, I'm going to start with just a very basic runny brown, very light. You see how I've got some in water and I've just watered that down as well. And then I want to have another one where I'm just adding my burnt sienna, which has a little bit of yellow ochre added to it, and I'm adding that to water as well. I'm going to wet an area first. I have just a nice medium-sized round brush that gives me a nice tip. Now I don't mind that my water's coloured a little bit because my wall's going to be coloured in this way. As I start painting, I'm holding the brush very flat to the page. It's almost touching the page. You can tell by the shadow how low, and right towards the end of the brush. What this does is it loosens up my marks. If you hold the brush too close to the tip, that means the pad of your hand is sitting on the paper and your scope of movement is very limited before you start making an arch or an arc with naturally with your hand. So I want this to be following these lines, so I'm moving my fingers back, and that makes the movement more loose. And you'll actually see if I can't zoom out here, sorry. If I zoom in, you can tell my hand isn't, but what happens, I run this part of my little finger along the page. So it sort of runs along and gives me more of a machine-like smoothness. Now I'm dipping into my brown, and while that's wet, I'm dabbing, but I'm very aware of these lines that I've created. So as I dab, I'm making sure that I'm moving towards the left. I'm dipping into both colours now to give a bit stronger, and I'm going to let it sit and run right up to these. I'm trying to, even though I've wet the page here, I'm trying to not go into this area because this is going to be a different colour. Now I'm just going to repeat this on this side, so starting with wetting the wall. No pot plants, no potted plants or things in this one, because I really want to focus on the technique for doing in the brickwork, the block work. Again, I'm being quite random, but I'm also being quite focused on these lines and making sure I'm sweeping along a line here and there. Because we're on the closer side, I'm going to get some darker little marks. And remember the tip from the building that I lined in. Be bold with your colour. Even though you probably figured out by now that I'm naturally a cautious painter, that comes from years of having to match things, like totally hyper realistic. But even then, I'm trying to always push myself to throw in some heavier colour, you know, a little bit of colour that's a bit different to what I think I might might use. I've got a very strong purple here. I'm even putting little dips of it in. And now we just wait for this to dry. Here I have mixed burnt umber, which is my dark brown, and Payne's grey, which is a very dark bluey black. It's quite dark, as you can see. There's not too much water in there. So now I want you to think of jigsaw puzzles, but I want you to think of them in a way that it's laying flat but at an angle. The reason why I put a few guidelines down here was simply to lead you to understand that the shapes we're going to work on here are slightly larger than the shapes that we're working on over here because of that rotation of the angle. So it's like we're putting in radius lines in a huge circle, and the center is on this side, so it's going to be narrower, and the lines here are going to be wider. The hardest part of this is to stay random. I don't mind that the marks are dark because you'll see what we're going to do later with the tint. But I'm trying, sorry my hand, I'm really trying to make it random and look flat. So I'm avoiding vertical lines, because vertical lines will make it appear as if it's standing up like the door. So what I'm doing is, see this line here where it indicates where the recess of the door meets the ground. You know, use that kind of angle, but just change it up a bit. Because for every angle that we have going this way, we have one going the same way as that baseline in the door. And if you can imagine again, there's a point over here somewhere, and I can actually be splaying and rotating my brush, not that severely, but pretty much like that. And that means that every now and again I can put down a bit of a guideline where I can see that that angle will work. So I'm just going to speed this up a little bit. The main thing is I'm using the same colour, but I don't care if it puddles in areas and it gets a bit darker and it's a little bit lighter in areas. I'm trying to be random with my shapes. Again, this is something that I would suggest you practice on a painting that you're not happy with, or just random little pieces of paper really, because it does take practice. Now, what questions you might have for me? How am I holding the brush? Well, look how I'm holding it really closely to the tip. I want that control. So I'm resting my hand because I want to have power over the shape of the line that I'm putting down, because I don't want to have those vertical lines. So all your horizontal lines shouldn't be horizontal, they should literally be this way or this way, if that makes sense. I hope it does. You can get away with a non-random one in there like that one every now and again. While I've got that colour, I'm just going to wet on dry this return of the door, because I want a little bit of contrast in it quite quickly. I'm putting the dark wash at the back, and then I'm just cleaned my brush, and at the front I'm just going to run pure water down, taking a bit of water out actually, because I want the power of that darkness just to run and seep into the front. If I'd kept more colour in my brush, it would have flattened it out, but because I took the colour out, I might take some colour out here. Just because that paper's wet, the colour from here will bleed in and I'll get some nice contrast, which is what I wanted. I'm still waiting for this to dry. So what I might do is go onto the key, I think it's called the key pattern, here, which obviously is going to be individual stones, but they're of different lengths and slightly different sizes. Now, when you paint something that's quite light on watercolour, I will leave it blank until I get my surrounding colours in. So at this stage I might do the door first, in which I'm just using my Derwent palette brown, which I would sort of say if you were buying a brown, it's more like a burnt umber or Van Dyke brown than a raw umber. Again, everyone's browns are different, and don't be guided by the name that I give you, but just now I'm blocking it in almost evenly to start off with, again because I want a little bit more control just to get some colour in here. I just want to lay this, because it's a dark door, I just want to lay the colour down first. And I'm pretty sure that's going to bleed, so I might leave a gap there. The reason why I left that little white gap is because I didn't want the darkness of this return to run into here, because it'll dull this area down. So see here, it's not bled in because this has been dry enough, so I get this lovely little line. Now as that dries, I am going back into my colour, which has my little bit of Payne's grey into it. So I'm both darkening the brown and I'm adding a little bit of coolness to it. So I'm adding a little bit of a grey into there. And what I want to do is just feed this in towards the edge and along the bottom. I'm just using the tip of the brush, which means I have a little bit of control over how much pressure, downward pressure, I'm using. I'm only sort of barely like tapping. If I was touching your arm with this, you'd barely notice that I was painting on you. It's one of the things I used to do with my students is make them close their eyes, and I'd be putting a little bit of paint on their hand and they could barely tell. So that's how light this pressure should be. I should have waited a while, that's bleeding into there, but look, I don't mind because it's an old door, and that age is shown by these little runs. And I don't mind that that's a bit drier there either, so it's kept its shape. I might wet it, soften it a little bit, so it doesn't look too hard and sharp. Now, while I've got that drying, I'll come back down here. I think this is dry enough now. Remember, if the paper's no longer cold, so that's still a bit cold there, but here it's not, so that means it's dry, or dry enough for me to work on. If you're not sure, it's a good idea to wait another 10 minutes or so. Typically I would wait if I was doing a tint, which means you're doing a run of watery colour over the top of something. I would wait at least half an hour, or I might get my hairdryer out and give it a bit of a burst with the hairdryer. But look, I'm not going to, I'm just going to be very light with my pressure. So I think we've talked about adding a tint before, but just very briefly. So what I want to do is have a colour mixed that I've got my burnt sienna here. I'm going to dab into a little bit of yellow ochre. There's the yellow ochre. And I'm just going to add that in. Yellow ochre and burnt sienna combined. I don't want it to be really light, but I don't want it to be a heavy colour. It's got to be very easy for me to run over what I've done. So I'm not wetting the page first, but I need the paper to be quite wet as I go. So what I want to do is lay the brush down. And I'm just dabbing it in areas. Think of a giraffe spot or zebra spot. And then I'm wetting the brush, and I'm just going to run them all together. Try not to work it too much. You want it to be that little bit of unevenness, and then you can purposefully work some edges. Towards the wall is the best place to darken some area. But notice I'm not rubbing hard or heavy, and I'm not working and staying in one area for too long so that I would disturb the foundation of the grout lines that I've already placed. And then you can go back and sort of like a jigsaw puzzle, colour a few in, maybe a random one every now and again. I've just added my brown Payne's grey colour in there a little bit. Don't do that too much though, you don't want to make it all same. So now I've got my door based in, my return wall, and I'm ready for this keystone and my base here, which I probably should have done in the stonework. So the last thing we want to do is this wash here, and really for me I would just be using, it's almost the residual paint that I have in my brush from touching like a little edge here. You can see how almost pale and transparent that is. So what I want to do is just think of leaving more white paper than painting. That's the key. The beginner brain sometimes will make you feel like you've got to colour everything in, that it won't look finished or correct. But the key is be brave and be prepared to leave lots of white. What's the worst thing that can happen? Well, you can have too much white and you'll have to go and paint some in later when it's dry. There's really no worst case scenario with this. I'm changing this over to a little tiny bit of the burnt sienna, just a little bit, and hopefully you can barely see that because that means that I'm doing it light enough. Now I've got some purple here, and I can see that this is too close to the door, so I'm going over with a nice little soft run of purple, which will give me some differentiation because I'm actually adding that purple into my brown and Payne's grey, and that's going to be my grout lines. Now again, use a tip, have your fingers close to the edge. In fact, I'm on the metal part of the brush, and if I have my little wobbly hand happen here, it doesn't matter because these old bricks have a nice natural rough edge. Don't worry about changes in thickness of the line. That actually helps build the character of the stonework. Unevenness is actually key to giving it character. A little bit more colour, but can you see how I'm going softly? I'm not going in with a really hard, heavy dark. This may be not dry enough yet, this side, but that's okay. You get the idea. And again, if you're not used to your perspective, you know, if you've got those lines drawn in a little bit heavier, that's going to be much easier for you to do. I do make it look easy because I've done literally thousands of perspective paintings. Now, continuing on with that same grout colour, but less purple, more of the brown and Payne's grey mix. I'm actually going to go in and keep those lines going, but thinner lines, and just almost nonsensical marks, but because they're in that horizontal pattern, I can get away with these little, they could be darker bits on the wall, little chinks out of the wall, colour variations in the brick. Remember, it gets wider here, so whatever you're doing here, it's got to be wider on this side. I'm going to put actual less detail in the grout here because I don't want it to get too busy. Now I'll just tint this little bit in here. Now I'm going to start darkening things up a bit because, as you can see, it's not enough contrast. So now I'm drying my brush off a little bit, and I'm going back to the same colour, but not with any added water. And for control, I'm moving my fingers down, so my whole back of my finger in my hand is resting on the paper. You can see my little fingers out as that pressure gauge, so that way. And I'm getting in the middle, so I don't want to reach up too far because that's harder. You know, you're more comfortable in this zone when you're trying to do a straight line. And what I tend to do is I move my whole arm. So I'm actually leaning back in my chair as I go. And you can see I'm not doing this. My whole arm, my whole body is moving backwards. And my hand stays fixed, which means that I'm getting a really nice, strong, controlled line. Now I can add this part in because I just want that little bit of unevenness. But when I want a really carefully straight line, that's my secret, is don't do this. Lock your hand in a position that it can stay in and move your whole body backwards. I'm flattening the brush out a bit now, so this way. Still a bit of moisture in there, but I'm just darkening the base. So I think I'll leave it there. I don't want to overcomplicate it, but I hope that you can see the benefit of putting those lines in first. Okay, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, because I'd love to start building a little scene with you, and cobblestones and the old block work would be part of that. Okay, thanks everyone for being with me today, and yeah, I hope it's helping. Thank you. Bye. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. Have a lovely week, and please write a comment or a question down if you have any. That's the best way that I can tell that I'm helping you or that I'm missing out on some things, because honestly I've been painting for so long. I love teaching, but some things come so easily to me that I may actually forget that, you know, that's an important point to share with beginners, because I just want you to enjoy painting as much as I do, and I also want it to feel as easy as it does for me. And I know that I can do that. It takes time, but it also takes you helping me by giving me some feedback. And hopefully I can do a little session, like even in between every Friday. If it's just a question, I can do a quick little video and address it so that it can help you during the week. Thanks everyone. Have a great week, and let's be creative. Bye.